A new report from the bipartisan Wisconsin Policy Forum shows teacher turnover surged this year in Wisconsin. The report focused on more than a decade of data and analyzed teacher turnover from 2009 to 2023. Overall, researchers found an average of 11.5% of the state's teachers either left or moved each year. In the 2022-2023 school year, that turnover rose to 15.8%, the highest percentage over the course of the 14 years they studied. Joining me now from Milwaukee to make some sense of the report's impact is Sara Shaw. She's a senior researcher at the Wisconsin Policy Forum and has a focus on K-12 research. Sara, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Just to get us started here, in general, this report references teacher turnover. Under that umbrella is teachers moving and teachers leaving. Can you clarify the difference before we get into this?
That was one thing that was important to us in these data, is that it showed us both of these sides of turnover. So moves are teachers moving from teaching in one district to moving to teach in another district. And then our leaves are teachers who left the Wisconsin public school classroom altogether. It could be for any number of reasons. They retired, they resigned, they moved into a non-teaching role still in the same district, they moved out of state, or they moved into a private school classroom. But all of those would be captured under leaves.
Okay, that'll help us a little later when I have some other questions for you. Well, although this report details that all types of districts did experience at least 10% turnover on average during the years that were studied, it didn't impact all teachers equally. So where did you find turnover had been the highest?
So not only did it not affect all teachers the same way, it also didn't affect the districts in the same way. So on the teacher side of it, we broke down teachers by race and ethnicity and saw that our white teachers on average actually had below average turnover. So turnover as a whole was about 11.5% during the period we studied, and teachers who are white are 11.3%. Just under that statewide average, which maybe wouldn't be so marked, except when we looked at teachers of color, those percentages were much higher, led by the most came from our teachers who are Black, who were turning over at rates over 17%. Now, part of that might be that our teachers who are Black are also concentrated in districts that saw greater than average turnover for teachers of all races and ethnicities, or it might have something to do with their experience as teachers who are Black in the public school classroom.
And did you also find that there was a difference between more urban school districts and more rural school districts?
We did. So that was on the teacher side of things, but then lots of differences when it came to the types of districts. So we looked at districts locale and geography. We looked at the types of students who were served. We looked at the size of the districts. And it was actually our rural and smallest districts that got hit the hardest by turnover. City districts a little bit as well, just over higher than average turnover. And then our districts that were serving majority students of color and majority of students from low income backgrounds also saw higher than average turnover.
Can you pinpoint any reason why teacher turnover did surge? And then kind of part two here, were those surges driven by leaves or moves?
When we were first looking at this data set, we really wanted to look at the pandemic data because we had heard a lot of concerns about the educator workforce during that turmoil. And what we found was that in 2021, which is the first full year impacted by the pandemic, turnover was actually down. It seems like teachers were staying put, whether because of the economy or the general instability, wanting to be there for their kids, a lot of possible reasons there. But then 2022, the numbers start creeping up, and by 2023, they're the highest on record. That high of 2023 was the highest rate of leaves that we saw, the highest rate of moves that we saw in the data. So a lot of teachers moving from district to district, and then the second highest rate of leaves of teachers leaving that public school classroom in Wisconsin altogether.
Does the report talk about any factors that may have gone into this, as far as emotional, economical, anything like that?
We have some suppositions. Our research was really based on the data of it, but we talked with some administrators, did a little bit of literature review, and some of the factors that seem to be in play are number one, the broader economy. So 2023, very low unemployment, very high inflation, a lot of opportunities for workers of all types, including teachers, to be moving around. That seems to be part of it. There's also likely the accumulated stress and strain of the pandemic and coming back to school and where that has left teachers, perhaps also some politicization. And there's also in all of this, we have an aging workforce. So baby boomer retirements are part of this and potentially not recruiting enough teachers into the profession.
Why does the recent increase in turnover matter?
Particularly this recent increase, speaking of the last 2 years, matters because of that instability of the pandemic. Teacher turnover on its own isn't always a bad thing. It's when we see elevated levels that we're concerned. And when the pandemic created such instability on its own, to have the further instability of high levels of turnover can be very difficult for the children who are attempting to recover from the pandemic, or thinking of our littlest kids coming into the school system for the very first time and looking for a consistent experience for their education.
And what kind of solutions might exist here?
Some of the solutions here are about remembering that the educator workforce issues are about retention of teachers as much as they are about recruitment of new teachers. If we're bringing in new teachers and they're leaving within 5 years, we're kind of right back where we started in terms of the problem. If we want to be focused on retaining teachers, being able to use data like these and even more granular data at district levels to understand what are the hardest areas to staff, whether that's subject level or a type of school or type of district, and how can we attach supports and incentives, whether that's loan forgiveness or other financial incentives, mentorship, induction programs, ways of making teachers feel like they are valued and supported and that this can be a real career for them to stay in.
A robust report here from Wisconsin Policy Forum. Sara Shaw, thank you so much for breaking it down with us.
Thanks so much for having me.